Alright, welcome to part 2 of the Ragdoll. In part 2 we're going to be putting together the arms as well as the head. So you want to get started by right clicking on body 1 and we're going to do Shift D to duplicate it, and you want to move it to the left here. Okay. And we are going to size it. So let's do S and Z, and let's size it on the Z axis, and then go ahead and do S and Y, and we're going to size it on the Y. And actually let's do S and X and size it on the X. It really just depends when you set it up which way it was facing, so you have to be cognizant of the axes. So if it's the red axis is going this way, if yours is the same as mine, you would do S and then X and size it on the X. Okay. Alright, so once you have that, we need to change up the properties because right now it's the same as body 1. So we're going to click on Object here, and what we want to do is we want to name it. So we're going to name it ARM L1 and press enter, and that stands for arm, left arm 1. And we will also go here to physics, and if you're not on the Blender game up here, you want to check on the Blender game. So it'll be a rigid body, actor, and bounds is selected. And what we want to do with the radius is click it in and make sure that it's inside of the object. So I would put it at 0.2. And then next we need to go to Object Constraints, and we're going to add a constraint, and it's going to be a rigid body joint like we've done before. The target is going to be body 1, and we want to click on Display Pivot. And for our pivot, instead of the Z-axis, we want it to coordinate with basically whichever arrow is pointing through. So mine is the green, which is the Y-axis. So I'm going to put it on the Y. Now if yours was, if where mine is green, if yours is red, then you're going to change it on the X. Okay, so you need to look at that and see which one yours is facing. Okay, so mine's on the green going this way towards the body, so I'm going to use the Y axis. Now if yours was red, you would use the X. So put it at 1, so give it a value of 1, and make sure it's connected to body 1. Alright, and once we have that, you want to do Shift D, left click, and then use the green arrow and push it through. And you can see what it's pivoted to. You can see where it says Show Pivot or Display Pivot. It'll show it right here, and that's that green, or I'm sorry, not the green, the orange right there. Okay, so now we have our new object that we've duplicated. So we need to go to body here, or I'm sorry, object, and we are going to name it arm L2. Push enter, and we'll go to physics, and everything on physics should be correct. We've already changed the radius to 0.2. It's a rigid body, it's an actor, and bounds is checked. So we need to go to the object constraints and just change up what it's constrained to. It's still a rigid body joint. However, instead of a ball joint, we want to change it to a hinge joint, because this is acting as the elbow. And pivot 1 for the Y is going to be correct, so we'll leave that just like that. Okay, so once we have that done, you want to do Shift and right click, and we have both of them selected, okay, because I held down Shift. If you hold Shift, you can right click more than one object at a time. So go ahead and do that, and then you want to do Shift D and then left click, and then use your green arrow, or if you have red you'll use that, and you want to move it to the other side. So now what we need to do, go ahead and select this one first on the right, and this is going to be arm R1. So we're going to go to object here, and we're going to change the name to arm R1 and hit enter, no spaces, and we will go to physics, and all the physics are fine, so actually we don't need to change anything here. We just need to go to object constraints and change these. The target is still going to be body 1. The pivot type will be on ball, and then depending on if yours is red or green, mine is green, so it'll be on the Y, but it's going to be -1. And the reason we want that is so this arm will fall down to the side. It'll fall the opposite way of the arrow. And then once you have that, you're going to right click on this one. Okay, we're going to name this arm R2. And then for the constraint, it will be constrained to arm R1. Okay, so for arm R2 here, okay, we want to change the target to arm R1, and then the pivot type will be a hinge, and then you want to make sure that this is pivoting at -1 on the Y. Okay, now of course, like I've said before, if this is red right here, then you'll change it to -1 on the X-axis for these two. There we go. Just want to go over these. This one right here, let's see, I'm sorry. This one right here, now that I'm looking at it, you may want to go back. Make sure that the target is arm L1. It looks like I may have not showed you guys that on the video. Okay, so this one, basically they're linking up to whatever's next to them. So arm L2 is linked to arm L1. Arm L1 is linked up to the body. This one is linked up to body 1, and then this one is linked up to arm R1. Okay. Okay, so once you guys have that, go ahead and select body 1 up here. We're going to do Shift S, cursor to selected. That'll put the cursor right there. And we're going to add in the head. So you'll do add mesh and then UV sphere. Go ahead and put the head up just like that. And we need to go through and we need to set it up. So let's go to object mode here. And instead of sphere, we're going to name it head. And we'll go to the properties, the physics properties, and let's make it a rigid body, actor, and bounds. And then on the object constraints, let's add in the constraint rigid body joint like we've done before. The target's going to be body 1. We want to make sure that the pivot type is a ball pivot. You want to click on display pivot, and then the pivot will be on the y-axis. It'll be -1, and we'll enter. And actually, you know what, that should be -1 on the z-axis. Let's do that. There we go, -1 on the z. And when you zoom in, you'll be able to tell that that's correct because it'll be down there. As long as you have the display pivot on, that'll be good. Okay, so once you have that, make sure you go to File, Save, and then press P and you can try it out. My computer is not working because I'm using the laptop. It doesn't work correctly. So once you have that done, go to File, Save, and you'll be done with part 2.